The masses want to avoid things. They want to get rid of things. They want to gain things. They want to avoid half of life. From what I can tell, and I'm sure that as I learn more, this will be refined, but the first human beings that potentially lived on the planet, and I'm not going to, I have a 5-day course on how human beings came about, so I'm not going to go into detail on that, but the first human beings had what appeared to be low reflective awareness. And they were primarily in what we would call lower brain centers. They hadn't had a highly developed telencephalon, which is the most evolved part of the brain. And they were more kind of a animal behavior, more of avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, avoiding predators, seeking prey, thinking. We still have that area of our brain today. We call it the amygdala, and it's a desire center, and it is trying to avoid predator and seek prey even today, avoid challenge, seek ease. And we have now a more advanced part of the brain, the telencephalon, that's involved in objective reason, which allows us to create the sciences that we have today and some of the philosophical thinking that we have today, and more abstract conceptualization, mathematics, and things of this nature. But originally, man had low reflective awareness and more impulses for pleasure and instincts from pain. And it was basically surviving. And out in surviving in the wild, in nature, anything in nature that it didn't understand that was a mystery, and I'm going to use the term mystery, to its awareness, if it frightened it, it would try to avoid it. And what they found is there's an area of the brain in the parietal temporal frontal junction area that if you stimulate it with magnetic stimulation, it gives people an experience that they're communicating with some sort of a god or a communication with something that's satisfying. And that area of the brain lights up when we're traumatized, challenged, oppressed, frightened, when we have torture, turmoil, trauma, terribles, anything that challenges our value system, it lights up. And we dissociate from that trauma and we create the opposite content in the brain from our experience in order to survive. And we know that that area of the brain, we can do that electrically and magnetically and stimulate that and give religious experiences to people. And but what has happened is whenever we're under trauma or tragedy, that area lights up and gives us a religious experience. So we now know literally the brain areas that light up when we're having what we think are spiritual experiences and religious experiences. And it appears that our first fears, very early fears, were thunder, lightning, rumbling of earthquakes, pounding of animals, being eaten by animals. Even before the animals and earth, we were frightened about what foods to eat. We know that alkaloids tend to be toxic, and sweets and sugars and carbohydrates tend to be edibles. And we had to learn from it. And what we found out in the religious development, the very earliest religions, according to Taylor and others, is animism, where we basically project our agenticity and our idea that everything's alive onto things, and we talk to it and try to communicate with it to try to protect us from the things that frighten us. So religion seemed to emerge as a compensation for phobias, fears. And we would propitiate the things that we'd be frightened of by talking to some sort of a animistic, you might say, agent that would then we would pray to protect us from that thing we were frightened by. And the earliest religion is geomorphic, and the earliest remnants of religion are in caves, in symbolic drawings. Neanderthals are supposedly the place where this is supposedly identified, but I think it's much earlier than that. I think it goes back. We have some indications at going back around 300,000 years, but 50,000 years, we definitely have strong indication of it. And of course, once we started having, we weren't nomadic, we actually started having where we started plant things and live in communities and things of this nature, we started having organized religion. But prior to that, we had sort of an animistic stage of religion and shamanistic stage of religion. And we basically had gods that we made up to protect us from the things we were frightened of. So we had geomorphic gods, then we had zoomorphic gods, which were plant-based, based on the plants that would kill us versus save our lives. Then there was zoomorphic animal-based, and we had animal gods, because animals could kill us or frighten us. And eventually, when man became more frightening than the animals and the parts of nature, as we became solving these mysteries, and eventually anthropomorphic gods, and eventually astromorphic gods, which are basically things bigger, suns, moons, stars, and things of this nature. So what we did is we have a tendency in our amygdala, which is a primitive part of our brain, you might say, or subcortical part of our brain, better said. That area of the brain is involved in what is called false positives and subjective biases. So if we're out in the wild and we think we see some pattern or something moving in nature, we automatically animate it and give it an agent as if it's alive to protect us. We create pareidolia, which is the imposition of images that we think are alive. Just like if you look at wood or marble, you'll see images of faces of animals or humans in it. And that's a protective mechanism for, it's better to err on the false positive and assume something's there that's not there, to assume that a predator's there because he could eat us if we had a false negative, which means that we thought it wasn't there when it really was there. Better to err on the false positive where it's there even if it's not there, and that way we're prepared for it. So we had false positives, and we have subjective biases, and we had agenticity, and we animated things assuming it was alive to protect us from something that might move, that might be a predator. And we saw patternistic, we saw patterns in behavior that we then assumed with pareidolia that was animated to protect us from something that might eat us, or protect us from something that might harm us. And then we had also the same thing for prey. We had a pareidolia, which is the seeing the faces and images of animals that we think are edible, and we would agenticity them and make them animated and alive. And this animism, this agenticity, is the first stage of religion, from what we can tell. So basically, in a summary, anything that frightened the earliest human beings that lived, anything that frightened them, the brain would dissociate from it and create content in the brain from its experience to counterbalance that phobia in order to survive, to keep the brain from going into full reaction. And then we would create false positives to assume that it's something that could harm us, to prepare for it, or something that would save us from it. And we now carry that forward into our religions today. The lowest level of religious development that we have today is reward and punishment religions. It's the bottom of the barrel. So we blame something on the outside that we think is frightening us. We personify it with agenticity. We create an image on it, which we may call the devil, for instance. And then we have this other side that we have agenticity on, and pareidolia. We'll personify that, and we'll give it a title that saves us. We'll put a father figure on it, or we'll put some sort of a savior figure on it, a prophet figure on this, or something that takes away our fear. And then because we'll subordinate to that thing that we think is going to protect us, we'll inject those values, and we'll try to live by those values that we project, that we've made in our mind. And then we've ended up creating these kind of pseudo gods or false gods, these anthropomorphic deities that the world has been basically infested with for, God, thousands of years now. Many of them have risen, and many of them are gone. In the Mayan culture, for instance, there was a rain god. When they were frightened of thunder, they had a thunder god and rain god, because they could flood and they could be struck by lightning. And so they would appease the gods by talking to the agent of that god to appease it and try to give things and support its values so it wouldn't be angry, because they were perceiving these things as being angry gods, and they were frightened of these gods. But eventually we realized what thunder came from and what lightning came from, and when we did, those gods disappeared. And so these anthropomorphic and zoomorphic and gods and geomorphic gods are pretty well, most of them are gone except in undeveloped countries today, because we passed through that stage of development, and we now have solved mysteries with our questioning and reasoning and reflective awareness. And we realized that everything out there that frightened us had nothing to do with what's out there. It had everything to do with our perception of what's out there. And that's why I can take somebody who's frightened about something, and the breakthrough experience, for instance, and take it and dissolve the fear out of it, the phobia out of it, by finding the upsides to it. And instead of having to pray to something to protect it, there's nothing to protect. And so you don't need to have this artificial anthropomorphic deity to protect you from this artificial phobia that you have. So religion came as a protection for people who didn't know how to govern themselves, didn't have a higher brain function, that didn't know how to neutralize and balance their phobias and their philias. They had to create these constructs. And it was a necessary construct for the average person. There was not a lot of reason and a lot of understanding initially. So we had to migrate through these stages of moral development and spiritual development. But the lowest level of moral development is avoid predator, seek prey, avoid punishment, seek reward, avoid negative, seek good, positive, avoid evil, seek good, avoid the devil and seek the savior kind of thing, or the hero figure in mythologies. And that's the lowest level. The highest level of religious understanding as we go up in the brain development is the realization of objective reason. It's a mathematical equation that's balanced. The positives and negatives aren't imbalanced. You don't have prey that's all positive and predator that's negative. You have them integrated. And that's what objectivity is you see the balance of both. And it's the realization that there's a hidden order, a mathematical hidden order in the universe. And you could personify that and call it like the panpsychics have done throughout the ages, where you imagine the whole universe is intelligent and the universe is trying to assist all living organisms to evolve. And the moment we see both sides, we maximally evolve. We know that maximum growth and development occurs at the border of support and challenge, or prey and predator. Imagine if you got prey without predator, you'd get fat and sluggish, and you'd end up being out of fitness. And if you had predator without prey, you'd get skinny and starve. But if you had prey and predator together, you maximally keep your fitness and you continue to grow. So the highest level of the brain is more objective. It's not frightened by negatives without positives. It's not philic and fantasizing by more positives without negatives and praying to some anthropomorphic deity to protect it. It integrates the two, and it realizes that it's not out there, it's inside you, and it's your perceptions. And the highest religious understanding is the realization that all pairs of opposites that are supportive and challenging are paired synchronously, and that you realize that there's a hidden order in the apparent chaos, and you actually have a feeling of love for that and an embracing of the order that's there. And so religion goes from the most polarized, avoid pain, seek pleasure, to the most synthesized, where you embrace both in the pursuit of some cause, some purpose in life, something deeply meaningful. The Stoics reference this, and many philosophers have said this, but religion is got through different stages. The most basic religion is basically avoiding trauma or something that frightens you and seeking something that saves you from that fright. That's why praying to a God to protect you from your fears is still carried over. It's kind of a childish development, but it's used. I always say that the highest prayer at the top is not protecting you and asking for things to change. It's basically acknowledging the hidden order that's there that you've been denying. I tell people those that are searching for a God the most are the ones denying the presence of the divine, the order of the universe the most. But when you actually see the order of the universe, there's nothing to protect yourself from. There's nothing to run from or seek or avoid. And whenever you're trying to change others to live in your values, or you're trying to change you to live in other people's values, you're going to have frustration and unfulfillment. You're going to want to kind of pray that something is going to change the repercussions of that frustration. So the highest prayer, if you will, is thank you. I love you, and I see the order, and there's nothing out of order, and I appreciate the way it is, as it is. Om Tat Sat, as the Gita used to say. But the bottom line is our religion developed anthropologically from our fear of nature and our evolution of what we were frightened of through time, from geomorphic to zoomorphic plants, zoomorphic animals, part animal, part human. You can see this in Egyptian writings and some other cultures, the Mayan cultures and other cultures. Eventually anthropomorphic, as you see in the Abrahamic religions. And eventually you honor the hero, but the real hero and the villain, when you actually merge them together, you get the true divinity. The true divinity does not build without destroy, or does not destroy without build, but transforms. I always say the master lives in a world of transformation, not in the illusions of gain and loss. And the masses want to avoid things. They want to get rid of things. They want to gain things. They want to avoid half of life. And so I'm not a promoter of that. It's a stage of moral development, as Kohlberg said. But Kohlberg said that you live avoiding pain, seeking pleasure. Then you live by subordinating to mothers, fathers, preachers, teachers. Then you live subordinating to convention and tradition of people in your neighborhood, community, city, state, nation, and then world. And eventually you transcend that and realize that you transcend those moral things of good and bad and avoid and seek. And you realize that both are necessary in the journey. There's no hero and villain except what you have inside, and they're always together as a pair. When you finally embrace that, you've got the true religiosity. As Einstein said, he's not interested in anthropomorphisms. He's not interested in artificial gods made in the image that create these moralities that we supposedly come from the gods, but actually come from humans made up, and then they make artificial gods to promote the ideals that they're living by. I'm interested in exploring the magnificence of the universe, seeing past the avoiding and seeking model, and seeing the synthesis and synchronicity of all things at the same time. And I think that's the highest religiosity we can obtain. And many times people dissociate and think that they're going to get somebody saving them, and somebody, as long as you're giving credit to something outside you and blame something outside you, you haven't got to true religiosity yet. That's my experience.